All righty. Good morning, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well this morning. Getting some stuff set up here. All righty. Well, good Monday morning. All right, getting this shared out here real quick. Do do da do 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 da do do. It's always fun when that pops up. Okay, I think we're looking pretty good here. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. Well, again, good morning. Hope everyone's doing well. Oh, yes. So, just getting things rolling. It's been a good morning. I hope your Monday morning is also going very well. So we are getting set up here to talk about gain staging today. So this, of course, involves stuff that you would typically do when you're setting up for recording or even doing things live. But this can also make a difference too when you're working on mixing. So it's kind of what I wanted to go over today. So I'm just getting some tracks kind of set up here that we can listen to and kind of start going over how things work, which should be quite fun. All right, so I'm just taking a look at everything. We're looking pretty good, honestly, which is great. Okay. So let's dive in. Take a look at what we've got going on here. Alrighty, so we've got a Pro Tools session up and running. So just kind of go through and look real quick. So we've got some drum parts, some bass parts, some guitar parts, etc., which is all so much fun. Alrighty, so to get back to the idea of gain staging. Gain staging is basically setting your levels, whether that is a recorded level, so like from a microphone into a preamp, or also into plugins if you're in the DAW, setting it to a level where you're getting the least amount of noise from the circuitry, from just like ambience, but also not clipping. So this was a really big deal when we were still, which some still do, but recording to tape. So tape and analog gear had an inherent hiss or a noise to it. Now, of course, this is kind of iconic on music because we're kind of used to it when we listen to older music, but they had a lot smaller of a window to work with when they were gain staging things. So this is kind of an interesting setup because you couldn't record things too quiet, because if you did, you got a lot of hiss, a lot of noise. But if you recorded things too loud, it would clip and could possibly sound bad or ruin the take. So there was this fine line in between that you had to record to. You wanted it loud enough to make sure the hiss was low, but not so loud that you clipped. Now, with the digital era of music and the increase in quality and ability of most interfaces nowadays, this window has gotten larger. So our noise floor has come down. So that means you have even lower noise when you're coming in to deal with any kind of buzz or hiss or any kind of issues there, which in essence means that we can actually record quieter. So when you're setting recording levels, you don't have to set them as high as you used to. You know, that was a big misconception. Now, of course, there's a lot of factors that play into that. So not only are you talking about the preamps or the converters, say in the interface, you know, you're also dealing with the switch from 16-bit to 24-bit. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit about the actual headroom available in the DAW, in the computer, which at this point anymore, good luck clipping it. You know, if you do, then you probably are pushing something way, way, way too loud. But because of this, we don't have to follow the old school rules of, you know, you got to get it as close to clipping but not clipping as, you know, as you can. You can record things quieter and still gain them up after the fact and kind of be okay with it. Now, this does not include noise in the background, for example, like fans running or noise from the street or things like that. That stuff is always going to be there because that's what the microphone is picking up. I'm talking about the actual noise in the circuitry itself. So when you go and you look at maybe purchasing an interface or something like that, or you're looking at a preamp, like an external preamp you're trying to plug in, a lot of times in the specs, they will show you some kind of noise for like a THD, and it'll give you like a negative 119, negative 121, etc. So that is where the noise floor sits. So that means that the inherent noise of the actual piece of equipment, so where you hear that noise is negative 121 or 119 or 18 or 110 or wherever it happens to sit down there on that noise floor. So you would have to start to gain up, you know, quite a bit, you know, 50, 60, maybe even 80 or 100 dB before you actually hear the noise of that. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily the gain on the knob, even though if you do push it quite hard, you can start to hear it. But again, this is just the noise that's inherent in the systems itself. So this does transfer over when we're talking about a DAW and we're talking about gain staging. But it depends on what you're working with in the DAW. So if we jump in and look, let's go to this shot here. So this all depends on what we're working with. So whether we're working with an analog styled plugin or a digital plugin, which we touched on this a few weeks ago, but I kind of wanted to get further into it. So I'm going to pull up, we'll just pull up let's see, the VMR, virtual mix rec. Let's go to harmonics. I'm going to grab FG73. Now I'm going to actually bring this over the snare drum. You can take a listen here to the snare. All right, and we're in a good spot. Let's see here. Let's turn that off. Okay. So we have a snare drum. We can even look at the levels here. So we're about -10, maybe -8. And here I'll do this so you can actually tell. We'll just go to a sample peak here, like that. So yeah, we're about 10 dB under 0 on the peaks, which is again kind of quiet. You know, if we look at the RMS now, again, it's a drum. So let me switch to a VU style. Like it's way down there. So that kind of gives you an idea of where it's sitting. Now again, drums are very dynamic, so we don't have a lot of like RMS, especially like this out of close mics with kicks and snares and toms, etc. But looking at like something that is modeled on analog, we can actually start to push this, right? So it starts to clip out and you start to get all that kind of nice, beautiful saturation as if you were going through an actual pre. But let's do it a different way. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually jump trimmer over here to start. Let's see here. Let's see. We are pushing -10. So let's jump in here to the snare drum, and I'm going to use the clip gain in Pro Tools. So I can actually take the clip itself and gain it up. So we're going to push this by, let's say 20 dB. Now in order to not blow out anything, we're going to use trimmer to turn it down negative 20 dB after the fact so we can go back in and listen. Okay, so that's roughly sounding the same. So as you can see like that, I gained it up by 20. Now, if we go and look here, let me do this real quick just so we can see it. Pre-fader. So again, we're way down there. Now, if I take this off, you can see we're back to normal. And then now I'm gonna take trimmer off too. I'm gonna take everything off, but I am actually gonna pull this down. Okay, now, what's the point of me doing this? Well, you could see the little yellow light hitting there. Now, when you're in recording mode in most DAWs, they're going to show you a red light if you clip. Now, again, this is when you're recording. That means you're actually clipping either the preamp on your interface or you're clipping the converters coming in to it. So it's actually recording that digital clipping. Once we're inside the computer, that's a different story because of the bit depth that we're recording at and how much headroom we actually have inside the computer. Now, when digital systems first came out, we were sitting at around, I think it was like 16-bit is when they probably maybe even had different bit size, but 16-bit was kind of like the standard in the beginning, which lent to around 96, I think, 96 dB of headroom. So that means from nothing to the top, you had 96 dB. Now, that is quite enough. I mean, our hearing, again, goes from 0 to about 120 dB, which at that point, you're basically blowing out your eardrums and going deaf. So 96 is still within that range and gives us plenty of room, which is great. But they were pushing things quite hard, especially like that through certain plugins or trying to get certain sounds. And they were actually clipping the computer. So they ended up finally jumping into 24-bit. 24-bit increases it to like 144 or something along those lines. So way above what our actual ears can perceive and what we can pretty much reproduce with a standard speaker system. It got like through a PA or in a car or in headphones. And then, of course, you have 32-bit float, which kind of goes on infinitely. You've got so much room that you'll never, ever need that much. But again, so when I play this again, you can see we're clipping by almost 12 dB down here. So down here, 12 dB of clipping. Let me jump in here. So down here, you look right in this area here. You've got about 12 dB of clipping, but we're not actually clipping. When I play it again, we're just getting that yellow light. So that yellow light is telling us that yes, we are kind of clipping, or we could be clipping something that's, it's going on, say if we have plugins on, if it's a certain type of plugin. But basically we're going over the standard threshold that we have set in the DAW, in the metering system. But we're not actually clipping because the computer has enough headroom that we can go way beyond that. In fact, if I jump back over and we take a look here, 36 is about the max I can do here. So let's see what this does. So now you can actually start to hear that. Let me scroll down here. So we are starting to hit a top there now that we've gained it up so much. And no matter how much I bring it down here, you can hear that clip on top because we're pushing it so hard. Now, if I do something different, if I say I don't use clip gain, instead I'll bring trimmer over here again. Let's bypass our pre. We'll push it by 24, and you know what? We're going to duplicate that. Let's see if it does the same thing. If I use a plugin to push it this hard, it does. So we've reached the top of this specific, the way this is set up. So you can still clip inside a DAW. Something to know. So gain staging is important. Now, does that mean if I crank this up, and bring it up, now, that kind of clipping that's coming from an analog plugin is a little bit different than the digital clipping we were hearing before. So let's take that off. So we've got it gained up, but let's try a different plugin. I'm just going to pull up a standard stock EQ, and let's see what happens when I push into this. Well, now, if you actually look, we do have red lights here. We have red lights on the EQ, which is telling us that we're clipping. However, we don't hear it because this plugin it's a stock plugin that comes with Pro Tools, and in pretty much every DAW, whatever stock plugins you have, if they're not fully modeled on analog, they of course are going to not clip because they're digitally modeled with the system, so they have the same floating point or headroom that the actual DAW has. So you can't actually clip this until you push it to its maximum. So like we saw, I pushed it to the max, we got clipping. But if you go over, it's not that big a deal. So like, for example, we're going over, let's see how much we're going over right now. Like that, we're going over, what did I say, 15 dB. So if we drop this down by negative 24, let's go like 10 dB. So you can see we're right at that clipping point on here. And so if I take this, still, again, at that clipping point, but we're not going to hear it. So why does gain staging matter when you're in the box? Well, a few reasons. Gain staging is going to help you depending on what you're using. So for one, if you're using analog plugins typically are expecting, or they've programmed them to see a specific level coming into them. Most notably somewhere in the -18 to -15 realm. Now, why is that? Because that's where analog systems were designed, and that's where VU metering comes in. VU meters were designed to give you your 0 point as -18 or -15, some maybe -14, -12, somewhere in there, but usually around -18. That's where a dB meter sits. So if I pull up just a standard meter here, and we change this to VU, you can see it's got 0 point here. That 0 point, again, equates to -18 on this scale. So if I go, let's look at like a classic scale. Actually, let's see here. Do we have one that'll work? A linear. So the RMS is sitting around that -18-ish point there on the meters, but as you can see, we are definitely clipping on the VU. Now VU meters, if we watch again, watch the actual VU, you can see it's kicking up there quite a bit. But this is how VU meters were designed for analog gears. They have that 0 point is -18, which equates to -18 on a digital scale in the computer. And then 0 is usually your clip point of the actual converter when you're pushing out. Now again, we're not clipping here. However, if I scroll down here, if we were pushing it to the point where we were clipping out of our master. So basically, it's coming out of the DAW and going out to the converters of our interface to our speakers. That is digital clipping because you're clipping the converters. So this has to do with what's, where you're gain staging. So coming into your interface, if you have red lights, you're clipping the converters because that's an analog to digital converter, A to D. It's literally transforming electricity, right, voltage into ones and zeros that can then be read and recorded by the computer. Vice versa, when it's coming out of the computer, so when you're going from digital ones and zeros to analog voltage coming back into your speakers, that D to A converter can also be clipped. This is usually the only point that you want to really, really, truly avoid clipping, is whether you're coming in from the interface into the computer or when you're going out of the computer through the interface. Once you're inside the computer, you have a lot of headroom, especially if you're recording at, say, 24-bit, or if you go all the way up to 32-bit float, which kind of gives you like an infinite ability. Again, I would personally never run them that hot because you really don't need to, but it gives you headroom just in case you need to do something. So we'll switch back to a different metering system. Let's see here. Go back to K20. Okay. So again, does it matter when we're doing stuff like this? So let me grab, let's see here. Let me think. Let's just grab just grab this. We'll take a look here. All right, so if we go ahead and hit this. Now you can hear all I'm doing is really just compressing it really hard. But what happens if we really, really push into this? Will it itself clip? So let's take this back to 24 and let's see what happens. Play it again with it on. You can actually hear there's some like saturation going on and stuff from this plugin because this is even though this is a digital plugin, it was modeled on analog. Whereas if I just pull up a standard dynamic plugin from Pro Tools, and again, we'll kick it hard. It actually, it was still trying to compress a little bit, but the idea here is if I take the ratio down, say, push it, take it off. Back on. The sound isn't changing, right? I'm not actually doing anything. So if you're using plugins that are modeled on analog, that are designed a specific way to see a specific level, gain staging matters, right? It matters what you're pushing into the plugin because the plugin they designed it to expect a specific level. Again, 0 on a VU meter is -18. -18 is typically where saturation and coloration is starting, and that's kind of where they would usually shoot, except on drums. Drums are different because they're very dynamic. But that was kind of the goal, was to kind of get it in that same area as if you were running through analog gear. If you had a giant meter bridge across a desk and you were watching the actual VU meters hit. So a lot of analog stuff is designed that way. It's designed to sound a specific way when you have things like that on there. When you're working with digital plugins, it really doesn't matter. until you start really messing with gain staging and building a mix. Now, we're going to cover this a little bit further in a few weeks, probably about 2 weeks. But if you look at a fader here, I'll just grab grab one of the snare drums here. You can see that say down here at the very bottom, you've got negative infinity. And as you slowly come up, you guys have 117, 190. So I'm barely moving it. You see how fast it's jumping. So I'm just tweaking it 60s, 57, 55, 54, 52, 51. So it's slowly coming up. Now, if I'm up here at 0, I'm making those same slight movements, 0.2, 0.4, 0.7, 0.9, 0.1, 0.14, 0.16, 2.1. You can see I'm moving it about the same speed. I'm doing my best to try and move this the same speed, but my resolution, basically the finite ability of the fader, is much better. So why does this matter when you're talking about gain staging? Gain staging into plugins is great, but also gain staging onto your faders can be really nice because you have more finite control. Now, granted, for example, Pro Tools, if I hold Command and then I do this, I have even more of a finite ability. But even then, so I can go down by 0.1s here. But let's come down here and do the same thing. I'm holding Command down. You can see like that. 138, 133, 127, 122, 117, 11, 6. Now I'm jumping by dB once I get to a certain point. So it's a little bit harder sometimes to have that resolution, that ability to go in and actually make finite movements on a fader. So it does matter that you stay within, I typically shoot for usually, say, -20 to 0 to maybe +6 or something like that. Within that range where the fader, it has the most control, especially because we actually use physical faders when we're doing mixing. So it is nice to have that, that control when we're actually moving things. So gain staging is very important for us. And it should be something that you should try to work on when you can, because it will actually help you create better mixes. So, for example, here we have all the drums. So I'm just going to grab all the drums here to start, and we can listen to these. And see, we don't need this guy on there. Okay, so there's some drums. Now, I haven't fully messed with these that much, so there are some things I would actually probably change. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and make a few quick adjustments here while I've got it going. All right. Okay. Now, of course, there's more I can do, but the whole point of this is to look down here at our submaster and our master. So submaster, I've got some plugins going here. So I've got a trimmer. I've got going into a virtual mix bus, which is set for a 4K E channel, so an SSL E channel, a little bit of saturation, some low end thickening, and then some top end and some low end, a little bit of boost, just 1 dB of each. And then from there, going into an SSL compressor, which I have set for the tax and release that I want, the threshold and the ratio, etc., etc. So if we watch the meter on this, when I put the drums back in, okay. Now, granted, I have the drums a little loud, but you probably get the idea. So if I have those, if I'm gain staging into this plugin, I have it set the way I want. Now, if I instead, let me do this. Let me grab all of our drums. I'm going to turn them up by, we'll go like 6 dB. But then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to turn the submaster down by 6 dB. So the volume shouldn't really change, but watch this. Now I'm hitting that compressor so much harder. So, okay, I'm hitting the compressor harder, so we need to change the threshold, right? Let's change the threshold some. Let's go to like somewhere around here. Okay, that's looking about the same now. And you notice here, if we look down at the submaster, we are starting to, we're clipping the submaster, but the volume really isn't that different. You know, we're hitting the compressor, we've got it set now about the same, and we turn this down, et cetera, et cetera. But if you continually push hard into all this kind of stuff, because remember, I have other plugins going on here, I'm pushing harder now into here. So it's usually best to kind of set yourself up to think about what you're doing at the end of your chain, especially if you like to run plugins on the end. If you want to have like a compressor to glue things together, or if you have certain plugins you're trying to build some kind of analog chain on the back end, you have to really think about how all of those numbers, all of that signal is adding up at the end. Because remember, like just here, let's look at the drums. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 tracks that I'm running. And those 13 tracks are coming down into 2 tracks, stereo, right? Left and right. So I couldn't run these at full blast. I have to run these at a certain level as we gain stage down. So I'm going to reset some things here really quickly. Not that one, we need that one. We'll take this back to our -15. And we'll take this back to 0. Okay, so now drum should be pretty much... about the same. Now, of course, as we start adding in other parts, you know, that signal is going to go up. So when you're thinking about gain staging, always keep in mind what you're sending out, or at least keep an eye on your master, because that is, again, that is where you're going to start clipping. If you start seeing red on your master, that means you're clipping your converters, and it's actually going to like print out or sound bad through the conversion when you do this. So you have to be really careful. So always keep in mind what you're doing when you're gain staging through, because as you're building a mix, especially if you start getting into these massive mixes where you have, you know, 10s and 20s and 30s, 40s, 50s, however many, even hundreds of audio files, and you're blending everything together, always keep in mind where you're ending up at the end. Now, yes, you can slap a limiter on the end and set your threshold and, you know, all this and that, which I have done here just for safety of sending out to you here on YouTube. But that can be a bad habit if you just immediately throw a limiter on and set it and say, okay, there's my limiter, so now I can't clip, and you just start pushing faders. Because what happens when you need to send that off, say, to a mastering engineer, or you need to bounce it out or something like that, and you take that limiter off and you forgot to check everything to see where you're actually sitting, you might be clipping like crazy. You know, and you're also going to be changing the sound of things, because now they're not being limited the same. You know, there's that misconception that, oh, a mastering engineer, all they're doing is just like limiting stuff for me and making sure it's loud enough, but I can do that myself with a plugin to emulate it. Well, okay, some of the like plug-in versions or algorithms that are out there, that might be something that they do, you know, but there's a lot to it about adding depth and adding width and changing the EQs on mid versus side and all these, you know, like saturations of certain frequencies, all these things that a mastering engineer does, that's going to change the way things sound. So just by slapping a limiter on and saying it's done isn't necessarily going to yield the best results for you. And again, this is also going to affect the way your mix is going to sound, because now you're dealing with basically a false sense of what your mix is doing when you're going to your master. So it's always best, yes, having a limiter there, but use it as protection or just as a notification to you that, hey, I'm pushing things a little too loud. So if I open up the one I have here, you can see my peaks aren't anywhere near there. So like if I take this off, I'm taking it in and out. It's not actually doing anything. Again, it's just there as protection. I'm not actually using it to do anything really. So it's just kind of sitting there just in case. So where else, does this really matter when you're talking about gain staging? Well, this also can matter when you're dealing with effects. Certain effects, of course, could possibly saturate depending on what you're doing. So let's go ahead. I'm going to snag, let's see, actually, we're going to come down here, go to the bus. We're going to throw our snare drum into a plate. And let's come over here to our plate and take a look. Okay, I have the plate cranked. I wouldn't usually run this much, but it's just for demonstration purposes. So you could see how much we were sending out of the bus and how much was coming through or out of the plate itself. So I'm going to open up the plate so we can take a look here. Okay, so let's look at the input coming in. Okay, it's pretty good. What happens if I crank it? And I'll pull this down a little bit. In fact, we'll go pre on this, and I'm going to do that. We're going to solo up this plate. Okay. So let's leave it there. What I'm going to do though, I'm going to grab VMR, and again, with trimmer, we're going to start cranking into this. So I'm going to push it by, let's go like, say, oops. We'll go big, right? Let's go big. Let's go 20 dB. I'm going to pull this down now. Push it more. Okay, take it off. Okay, we'll do it again. Okay, so like there, we're dealing with something that to my ears at least, it doesn't sound like it's actually changing. So there's a floating point in this verb that allows us to kind of like overdrive or push it harder, which is great. But let's go look at something like, let me grab, where are you? Here, the rev plate. So now here we have a reverberation plate. This big old guy here. I'm going to make this 100% wet. All right, now this does have a drive knob on it, but let's see what happens. Bypass this for a minute. Let's see what happens here. Okay, now let's drive it. So same thing. It has a nice floating point in there that allows us to kind of push past or push over and not really do any kind of damage because it has a drive built in that will automatically saturate for us. So let's go look at another one. Let's see here. What's going to give us... Let me grab... Try to think of something that might possibly... Let's go grab a delay. I'm going to look at... Let's see if this will do what I'm thinking. So we did switch to a delay, but it should be basically the same idea. So sound a little bit different now. Bypass that. Okay, and let's see what it sounds like with it cranked into it. Okay, so this one, the way this one is designed is we can actually, like that, we're driving into its quote, drive circuit, and this is actually what's giving us this kind of gritty sound on it. Now, granted, again, this one also has a drive control on it, but you kind of get the idea is certain plugins are going to be modeled a certain way. So it's always nice to know what your plugins are going to do. You need to kind of have an idea, are they going to saturate? Do they have some kind of floating point in them so that if you hit them harder, it's not going to do anything? These are all very important aspects to know and to understand about your stuff, because this helps you make decisions and can also help you color or make flavor choices when you're mixing. Because if I grab this reverb or this delay and it's going to distort when I push into it, then maybe you want to kick it hard and get kind of a gritty, nasty distortion on, from the reverb or delay itself. Or maybe it doesn't do that, and maybe you want that sound. So now you need to add some kind of saturation plugin beforehand on the send of the reverb or the delay or the effect or whatever you're doing, to get that kind of a tone, to get that sound that you're looking for. Or maybe you're looking for a super clean sound and you're pushing into it and you realize that it is clipping. So you maybe need to select something that is cleaner. Or maybe you need to back off on the input and boost the output of it to get the sound you're looking for. So messing around with stuff like this can really be fun and can kind of help you sculpt and design things. There's a thing about the wrongness, the grit, the distortion, the coloration, the saturation, the non-linearities, all this kind of stuff that kind of makes music really fun and really cool. For example, one of my favorite ones to do is, of course, to saturate a snare drum. It just adds so much body to it and kind of adds this ability to make it poke out a little bit more. So, but I have to gain stage. I have to be ready for that in order to make it do what I want it to do, because it needs to sound a specific way for me. So I need to understand what the plugins are doing for me, so I can actually make it sound the way I need it to sound. All right. So now let's look at one thing here. I'm going to bring everybody in here. I'm going to take this plate off for now. We're just going to be running this stock. I'm going to seal these drums up real quick so we can take a look at the whole screen. And now I'm going to pull up VMR. So this is on my sub master. So everything I have is going to go to this sub master. So you can see here we've got the trimmer, the virtual mix bus, which is going through a desk, some saturation, the revival, and then a little bit of top and low end boost. Okay, so let's see what everything sounds like together. Okay, you get the idea. So now you can see I've got some drive controls here. I also have this saturation plugin going. So what happens when we start to push into these. Now, granted, like I could just turn the whole mix up, right? I could just take all my faders and say, I want to push these up into all of these plugins. But I do, and this is why I love using, say, like a trimmer or something before, or plugins that have some form of drive control on them. I can actually do this without actually affecting any of my faders, because let's say I have some sends going. So I've got, some bussing set. If I push my faders and those sends are not pre-fader, as I push the fader, it's going to change how much of the effect that, or how much signal I'm pushing into whatever effects. I might not want to do that. So using something like this, when we're gain staging or using plugins to gain stage, especially like this gain plugins, trimmer plugins, or plugins that have drive, we can then change the flavor. So I'm going to mess with the drive here real quick on the virtual mix bus, and see if it's going to make any difference at the levels that we're pushing. Okay, there's probably a little bit going on, but nothing crazy. But now let's do this. I'm going to actually use the input and output. Now these are linked, so they'll move. So as I move one up, it moves the other one down, vice versa. Let's see what happens if I push it there. Okay, so there you can see the red light was clipping on virtual mix bus, and we're driving it so hard, starting to distort, fart out, and kind of get kind of an interesting sound. Now, this could be very cool, depending on what you're trying to do. I mean, this could be kind of a neat thing to mess with. But again, this is all about gain staging, because luckily this is set that I have that kind of control on it. But if it was a plugin that maybe didn't have that amount of control, you'd have to go back to the beginning of all your faders and turn all of them down, which is going to adjust everything. So gain staging and getting it right in the beginning is going to help you as you build your mix and as you work your way through. Let's look at the other one. Let's look at this New York, this saturation, and see what happens here. Adding a little bit of grit on there. It's kind of nice. I'm going to turn the push on, and let's go forward again. You can hear some of the transients and stuff are starting to change a little bit. It's starting to actually take the tops off of things. And so there's some cool stuff that's happening there. And now again, you have to just be somewhat careful when you're doing this kind of stuff, because you're having to push into this, and if you push too hard, or you're not set up properly, maybe you're getting that sound that I had at 10, maybe you're getting it on 2 or 1 even. It's so much lower that you're just not getting the amount of control that you're looking for, and you have to go back. And this brings me to my last point here. Let's say you have everything set and you're pushing, you put some plugins on, it's too much, but you don't want to go back and you don't want to change anything here. Now, pulling down, depending on how your DAW set up, pulling down like say a sub master fader, if you're going to a bus, might not do it, because the plugin is usually before your fader. So it goes through the plugin first and then it goes to your fader. Now this isn't always true, and I can demonstrate this real quick. I'll pull up the master here. So we'll look at the master. You can see that on the master, specifically here for Pro Tools, that the plugins are after the fader, right? So your fader does affect what the plugins are seeing. Now in certain DAWs, you can set this. You can actually say whether you want your plugins pre or post fader, which is really, really nice. For example, the master here on the master fader, your plugins are post fader. So as you change the level on the fader, it changes how it pushes the plugins. Everything else is pre fader, aka your fader does not affect anything because everything is before it. But If you end up needing to do something, for example, if we were pushing too hard, say into this, let's say I had my threshold set at like -22 or something like that, and we're pushing, so we're pushing super hard into that. I need to change that. This is where gain plugins really come in and they shine, because you can throw in just a gain plugin. So I've got trimmer here. I could also go find, let's see here. I believe like here's another one. It's just a standard gain plugin. I can find another one. Here's one from Blue Cat. I believe the Blue Cat one is free, but this allows you to turn it down so that way you're not pushing as hard. So, you know, I could say I could turn this down by however much dB I need, for example. So now I don't have to go back and mess with my faders, because let's say I had all of that gained the way I wanted it to, and then I threw a plugin on, and I was like, oh my gosh, now this compressor plugin, I just can't get it to sound the way I want to or whatever. You have some more control in here to be able to do that kind of stuff. So it's really nice just to remember that you have this ability, and in most DAWs as well, you have the ability here on the track itself to do some gain adjustments if you're trying to push into plugins on specific channels. So you have a lot of ability to stage things properly and to stage things that are going to work best for you. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today, just talking about all the different options that you have and how to look at gain staging, how to work with it, how to use it to kind of sculpt and how to react to certain plugins, because again, certain plugins, especially analog modeled ones, are going to be designed to receive a specific level and saturate, distort, color a certain way when they see a certain amount of signal. Where digital plugins, they typically have some kind of floating point, and you can get away with a lot more and make adjustments and not really affect the tone. So I hope this is helpful. I hope this kind of gives you a new perspective on how to set things up. And maybe this doesn't just fall into like working in a DAW with you, maybe like that, setting your levels into recording. So again, remember that you don't have to record as loud because that noise floor is so low anymore. You have some room. You can record a little bit quieter and avoid clipping issues. Also in the live sound settings and things like that, gain staging is really, really important, because having better resolution on faders, you know, or on knobs and stuff can really, really help you. So it's something that matters and doesn't matter at the same time. So depending on what you're using, think about it, think about gain staging, and just kind of keep an eye on what you're pushing out, because with all the abilities to gain things up, you can always make it louder. But if it's so loud that you're clipping in a bad way, you cannot get rid of it. So next time you go to do a mix or you start to record, just check and make sure you're getting the sound you want, that you're not clipping in the wrong way, digital clipping, and that because you can't fix it, you can always turn it up a little bit later. I hope this was helpful to everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we will see you guys next Monday as we continue to dive into the DAWs and into the computer and get mixing. All right, enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks.